Welcome back to our power crisis. Now, as the Electricity Minister, Newzroom Afrika, gets used to his new job, maybe. We're still on stage 4. No indications of when the power system will improve or if it will improve, but a huge amount going on behind the scenes. More and more businesses and homes getting solar power. Government says it's working on fixing the bigger problems of the coal-fired power stations, which are the majority of the power generating fleet for Eskom. Dr. Ulrich Minaar is a senior manager for Eskom Research, Testing and Development. Dr. Minaar, good afternoon to you. We keep hearing about the emergency plan, the NECOM plan. Can I presume that there's a lot going on behind the scenes to try and sort out some of the problems that we face at the moment?
Yes, Stephen, you can presume that. NECOM has been active for a while, and there's eight work streams in NECOM. So there's been a lot of work that's gone on in those work streams, and there's a committee that runs on that. And so each of those work streams have a lot of detail. So there's a lot of work that has happened in that environment.
It's all very technical, and I understand that. Well, I don't understand the technicalities, but I know that it's technical. So I suppose my question would be, is there any idea of how long we're going to be in this position? We've seen so many different predictions. Some people have said a year. Quite a lot of people have said 2 years. Would you stick with the 2 years?
I'd almost like to follow the new minister's line and not give a prediction, but the current plan, as I understand it, as has been communicated, is for 2 years. So I don't want to put predictions down, but that's the planning and the sort of the targets that has come from that environment and from Eskom senior and executive management in terms of the plans to deal with the issues.
You'd be a very brave man. Anyone who puts the time to this would be a very brave man, Dr. Minaar. The fact that there's a new minister in charge of electricity, and I mean, the PR game, he's hit the ground running, he's answered lots of questions, he's done lots of interviews. Do you think it's going to take him time to understand all of the problems, or do you think he may be able to get going pretty quickly?
Look, I actually think he should be able to get going very, very quickly. In terms of that environment that he's now taking charge of, and I think essentially you can view it as he's taking political leadership of the NECOM structure and all the technical work that is taking place there. It's very organized, very structured. Each of the streams has a chair, and I'm fairly sure that they would brief him and give him the room to ask the questions that he needs to ask and test the plans that have been made so far in progress. So I don't really think it's a matter of this is going to take a long time to get him on stream. I mean, I think the environment is also different from a minister joining a long-established government department which is set in its ways. This is very much not that kind of environment that they're operating in there due to the urgency of the problems and the impact on the country.
It's interesting because, I mean, you have one person with quite a lot of political authority, and I think political authority may be quite helpful, especially during a time of national disaster. You've got regulations that could be quite useful to Eskom.
Yes, I don't want to read leadership's mind, but I do think that may have been part of the thought process, is that there's a lot of technical input and policy and regulation input that goes into that environment. And a lot of the time you can have a lot of good things happening, but you need the political leadership and authority to actually make it happen instead of being bounced around between people's priorities. So that then you put someone there who can give that political leadership and authority to the work that's being done in that environment.
We're about to start paying quite a bit more for electricity. 18% is the figure. I think that comes in, if I remember, 1st of April around there. That was the figure agreed to by the energy regulator, NERSA. So there's been a lot of discussion and political discussion about that. But the numbers really matter to Eskom. Is one of the reasons Eskom's in this position because NERSA just hasn't given significant, let me actually use the word substantial increases rather. Have you basically just not been getting enough money over the last few years?
Yeah, I think that's been the case, and it goes back more than 10 years now, and it's a sort of a repetitive cycle where I don't think any of us can remember when NERSA has actually given Eskom an increase that it requested, and this has gone back and forth for a number of years and a number of regulatory cycles as well as the regulatory clearing account cycles. And so when it basically comes down to it, is that money for operations, and the operations in Eskom's case is the generation, the transmission and the distribution. you need that money, particularly at the generation end. I think if we look at the electricity chain, you find that your generation consumes the bulk of the revenue, both for energy and for the actual plant, and then your transmission and distribution. And when you have a shortfall there, it impacts on the maintenance that you do and the operations, and eventually that does catch up to you.
I mean, maintenance is also important. The fixing of the machines, and I always, I've never been into one of these power stations, but my sort of sense of it is that you have an awful lot of moving parts all running at very high temperatures, right? I mean, it's almost designed to cause problems. How's all of that going? It's a lot of big machines that need a lot of maintenance. Some of them are very old, as we know. Do you think they're ever going to be able to get the EAF, I can't believe I even know what that is nowadays, to get the EAF up to the right figure? I mean, do you think that it's possible to make a substantial increase in the energy availability factor? Or do you think actually that events are just overtaking Eskom a little bit?
No, I think a large part of it comes down to your revenue and your skills and getting people on board doing the right things. And also your procurement, and the revenue and the procurement are very interlinked, because you have to know you've got the money before you can buy some of these parts that take 18 months or 2 years on lead time. And the feedback from the technical teams involved with that is that this can be improved, the situation can be improved, and we go with that, because these are the engineers and technicians and managers on the ground. And the realistic situation that we sit in here, Stephen, is that the only people that can give you feedback on what is possible with those plants are the people that actually work on the plant and have experience with this kind of plant. And it doesn't have to be Eskom plant. There are lots of other coal power units around the world. But and the point is that if you don't have extensive experience in that environment, you're just speculating. I mean, I've worked in that environment, and my background is not specialized on that. But unless you've got that extensive experience there, you're just speculating. I mean, if I had to, from my viewpoint, make a comment and say what is and isn't possible, because I'm not working with the plant, you wouldn't have to believe me, and you can't really take it seriously. And the same goes for anyone who doesn't have extensive experience and operational work with the plant. Any of those kind of comments is just speculation, really.
It's a technical problem. It's also a financial problem. So if, for example, the increase that you received was double 18%, say it was over 30%, I'm not saying that that's what Eskom wants, but I mean, that would make it easier, right? The more money, the easier it would be. Would that be right? It's a financial problem.
Yeah, that would make it easier. I mean, at that point, then the operations and finance teams can then put in place their plans. It's not the only thing at the moment, but that aspect of it, then you can deal with and sort of not a roadblock to achieving the objectives that you need to, or the plans that you've laid out. As it is at the moment, I think that 18%, which covers Eskom, municipalities are a different story, but it covers Eskom, is still short of what the Eskom finance team has calculated is needed. So even though it's 18%, it still doesn't cover the operational needs adequately.
Really shows you the difficulties of all of this. The problems of grid capacity, Dr. Minaar. So as I understand it, we're getting more generation capacity being built by the private sector. All of this needs to be put to the national grid, and actually there are problems with that capacity. How big an issue is that? I mean, if we also need to spend a lot more money on the actual distribution, not just the generation. I hear what you say about how important the generation is, obviously, but we need to clearly spend quite a lot. I mean, I've seen some people say R500 billion. I mean, I had to sit down when I heard that on the national grid just to get the distribution up and running.
All right. In terms of that, I think that's the next big trigger point in terms of our energy crisis and our energy future, really, because when we've got a system such where Eskom has, where you've got these big generating units, it's not that difficult, relatively speaking, to build the lines to them. When you start distributing them all over the place, now suddenly that transmission part of the network becomes much more important. You now got much more plants all over the place that you need to get to, and you've got to design your network to export from them. So it is a critical issue. We're hearing about a lot of megawatts that are wanting to be connected by the private sector, whether it be utility scale or private. There's not necessarily a place to connect all of them. And that needs to be carefully planned and managed, both in terms of, so there needs to be a connection between the network planners and sort of Eskoms and the municipalities' grid connection teams, so that where they actually say, here is capacity, you can put your plant there. If you're asking for a solar PV or a wind plant and there's no wires nearby, you can't connect, and the time to build transmission network is fairly significant. So you can strengthen the network in some places, but you can't build line that quickly and easily. It's sort of a highly complex process that involves procuring land, negotiating with landowners, and this takes long, not only in South Africa, right across the world, in the developed countries. We're talking 7-10 years in some cases. So that level of coordination between where people want to connect and where there is capacity available, I think that's the next big item that needs to be addressed, and we will likely see an evolution of how bid windows are done and how the private sector communicates with Eskom so that we can coordinate this better. It's just not possible for people to put up and say, I want to be here and I want to be there, but there's no network. It doesn't help anybody.
And I mean, some landowner is going to go to court. We all know this. You know, Dr. Minaar, I'm a journalist, and when a fellow journalist does the wrong thing, does something embarrassing, does something morally wrong, which unfortunately happens quite often sometimes, I kind of feel it. I feel everybody, you know, will rip me off. My family, my friends, community will give me trouble over it. Working for Eskom must be quite tough at the moment, eh?
Yeah, look, it's been tough for a while. I think, it's been tough for a while, and this last, I think, 6 months with load shedding having escalated the way it has, it hasn't gotten any easier. I mean, I have a lot of sympathy not only for the operational teams in municipalities and on Eskom's ground, but especially the teams that work in the power stations. These are people that are under a lot of pressure, and yeah, that makes it difficult. I think your leadership and management have shown a lot of support recently, so that helps, but it's definitely not an easy environment.
Dr. Ulrich Minaar, I really appreciate the time and appreciate the honesty. Thank you very much indeed. I know it's difficult to talk about matters involving your employer. Dr. Ulrich Minaar is a manager at Eskom Research, Testing and Development.